They cautioned, "You can't survive this atmosphere." She lit a cigarette and grinned in the toxic air. Part 1. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a gentle shudder. Commander stood at the observation window and watched as the planet came into view. It looked like a bruise in space. Yellow and brown clouds swirled across its surface. Lightning storms flickered in the upper atmosphere like angry veins of light. Had read the reports: hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia, a cocktail of gases that the Galactic Concord had officially labeled as deadly to all known intelligent life. No species had ever walked on its surface without a full environmental suit. Most didn't bother trying at all. And yet this ugly little world was one of the richest sources of rare minerals in the galaxy. 7 different alien species had formed a consortium to mine it. They operated everything from orbit. Robots did the digging. Sealed machines processed the ore. Living beings stayed safely in space, looking down at the poison world below. Humanity wanted in on the profits. That was why was here. "Commander," the voice came from behind her. Lieutenant, her aide, approached with a data pad. "The consortium vessel is hailing us. They're ready to receive you." Nodded. She straightened her uniform and checked her reflection in the dark glass of the window. Short black hair, brown skin weathered by years of service, eyes that had seen too much and still kept looking. She was 43 years old. She had served in 3 colonial conflicts, negotiated with warlords on Mars, and survived a hull breach that had killed everyone else in her compartment. A meeting with some alien bureaucrats didn't scare her. But it did annoy her. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 18 months ago. First contact had happened when a trading vessel had stumbled across a human mining operation in the asteroid belt. Since then, humanity had been treated like a child at an adult dinner party, smiled at, patted on the head, politely ignored. Earth's government had sent to change that. The shuttle ride to the consortium station took 20 minutes, spent it reviewing her notes. The consortium was led by the tall beings with translucent skin stretched over thin bones. They were old money in galactic terms. They had been mining worlds for 100,000 years before humans learned to make fire. The other species were similar. They who had 6 legs and communicated through color changes. They who looked like walking trees and thought in decades rather than seconds. The small and quick and obsessed with mathematics, and 3 others whose names couldn't pronounce. All of them had one thing in common. They came from gentle worlds, planets with mild climates and stable ecosystems, places where evolution had been kind. Earth was not such a place. The shuttle docked with a soft clunk, walked through the airlock and into a corridor that smelled of flowers and disinfectant. The consortium liked things clean. They liked things orderly. They liked things safe. Ambassador was waiting for her at the end of the corridor. He was tall, even for a. His membrane skin glowed with soft blue light, which briefing materials said indicated polite neutrality. His eyes, 3 of them, studied her with obvious curiosity. "Commander," he said. His translator device hung around his neck, turning his musical speech into flat English. "Welcome to station. We are honored by humanity's interest in our operations." Shook his hand. His skin was cool and slightly damp. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Humanity hopes this can be the beginning of a productive relationship." His membrane flickered, yellow this time, amusement if remembered correctly. "Of course, please follow me. We have prepared a presentation of our mining operations." The presentation took 3 hours. Sat in a comfortable chair in a room that was too warm and too humid, listening to alien executives explain profit margins and extraction rates. Holographic displays showed robots drilling into rock. Charts demonstrated quarterly growth. Everything was very professional. Everything was very boring. And everyone was very, very polite about the fact that they had no intention of giving humanity anything meaningful. understood what was happening. The consortium had agreed to this meeting because refusing would have been rude, but they didn't take humanity seriously. To them, humans were newcomers, primitives, a species that had only recently crawled out of their gravity well and started poking around the stars. They would smile at her, show her pretty pictures, then send her home with nothing. Had other plans. When the presentation ended, turned to her with his practiced diplomatic smile. "We hope this has been informative, Commander. Do you have any questions?" "Just one," said. She leaned forward in her chair. "I'd like to visit the surface." The room went quiet. Several of the alien executives exchanged glances. Its membrane skin flickered through several colors before settling on a pale gray. "The surface," he repeated. "Yes, I've never seen a world like before. I'd like to observe your mining operations firsthand." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Commander, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but surely you understand that the surface is inaccessible. The atmosphere is lethal. No living being can survive exposure." "So I've heard," said. "But you have observation pods, don't you? Sealed vessels for surface inspection." "We do," admitted, "but they are rarely used, the risk of malfunction." "I'm willing to take that risk." Another round of glances between the aliens kept her expression neutral. She could see them trying to figure out her game. Was this some kind of test, a strange human ritual, or was she simply ignorant of the danger? Let them wonder, she thought. Finally, spread his long hands in a gesture of acceptance. "Very well, Commander. If you insist on seeing the surface, we will accommodate your request. I will arrange for a pod to take you down tomorrow morning." Smiled. "I appreciate your hospitality, Ambassador." "Of course," skin flickered yellow again. "Though I must say, Commander, I am curious. What do you hope to find down there? Nothing lives on, nothing can." Stood up and straightened her uniform. She met the ambassador's three eyes with her own too. "Maybe nothing can, Ambassador," she said, "but maybe you haven't met everything yet." She left the conference room without waiting for a response. Behind her, she could hear the aliens murmuring to each other in their own languages, confused, uncertain. Good, she thought, let them be uncertain. Tomorrow, she would show them what humanity was made of. They cautioned, "You can't survive this atmosphere." She lit a cigarette and grinned in the toxic air. Part 2. The observation pod was small. It had room for 2 seats, a control panel, and not much else. The walls were thick metal with reinforced viewports. Emergency systems blinked in steady green rhythm. Everything was designed to keep the outside out. Climbed in and sat down. The seat adjusted automatically to her body shape. A technician stood outside the hatch looking nervous. "Commander," he said, "the descent will take approximately 15 minutes. You will land in the valley, one of our primary extraction sites. The pod's environmental systems will maintain breathable atmosphere throughout your visit." "Understood," said. "Under no circumstances should you attempt to open the external hatch. The atmospheric pressure is within tolerable range, but the chemical composition would kill me instantly." Finished. "Yes, I've been told." The technician's skin flushed with what had learned was concern. "You seem very calm about this, Commander." Smiled. "I've been in worse situations." The technician clearly didn't believe her, but he sealed the hatch anyway. A moment later, the pod detached from the station and began its slow fall toward the planet below. Watched through the viewport as the station grew smaller above her. Then the clouds swallowed her, and everything turned yellow. The pod shook as it descended through the upper atmosphere. Lightning flickered outside. Could hear thunder even through the thick hull, deep and rolling like the growl of some enormous beast. Rain began to fall, but it wasn't water. The droplets that streaked across the viewport were brownish-yellow, leaving trails of chemical residue behind. Beautiful in its way, a world that had never known life, a world that actively rejected it. The comm system crackled. "Commander, this is Ambassador. I will be observing your visit remotely. Please feel free to ask any questions about what you see." "Thank you," Ambassador said. "I'll try to be an attentive tourist." She could hear the confusion in his pause. Humans and their strange sense of humor. "Yes. Well, the mining drones you will observe are operated from our orbital control center. They work continuously, extracting rare Earth elements that are essential for advanced technology. Provides 17% of the galaxy's supply." "Impressive," said. She wasn't really listening. She was watching the clouds thin out, revealing glimpses of the surface below. Mountains, red and orange like rust, valleys filled with yellow fog, great crystal formations that glittered in the dim light. No plants, no animals, no movement except the slow drift of toxic clouds. It was alien in the truest sense, a world completely unlike anything on Earth. And yet, leaned closer to the viewport. She studied the atmosphere readings on the control panel. Hydrogen sulfide 850 parts per million, methane 1.8%, ammonia 200 parts per million, pressure 1.3 atmospheres, temperature 47 degrees Celsius. The numbers confirmed what she had suspected. The pod broke through the last layer of clouds and the valley spread out before her. It was magnificent in its desolation. Crystal pillars rose from the valley floor like frozen flames. Pools of liquid sulfur glowed faintly in the dim light. In the distance, she could see the shapes of mining drones, small and busy, crawling over the rocks like mechanical insects. The pod landed with a gentle bump. Dust rose around it and slowly settled. "You have arrived at the observation point," the automated system announced. "External conditions are hostile. The hatch will remain sealed for your safety." Unbuckled her restraints and moved to the viewport. She pressed her palm against the glass. It was warm. Out there, the air would feel like a furnace. It would smell like rotting eggs and cleaning chemicals. It would burn her eyes and scorch her lungs. She had survived worse. "Commander's voice came through the comm. "You are now viewing the primary extraction site. As you can see, our drones operate with perfect efficiency. The remotely operated systems allow us to harvest resources without any risk to living beings." "Very efficient," agreed. "Ambassador, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long would a survive if they stepped outside right now, without a suit?" There was a pause. "Commander, that is not a scenario we would ever." "Humor me." Another pause. Perhaps 3 seconds. The hydrogen sulfide would cause immediate respiratory failure. The ammonia would begin dissolving the membrane skin. Death would occur before the brain could register what was happening. 3 seconds, repeated, and the other consortium species. Similar outcomes. The might last 5 seconds due to their exoskeleton. The perhaps 7, as their biological processes are slower. But the result would be the same. No species in the consortium can survive this environment. Nodded slowly. She reached into her jacket pocket and felt the small box there. Cigarettes. An old habit from her military days. The doctors kept telling her to quit. She kept ignoring them. "Ambassador," she said, "I have to tell you something. I've been reviewing your atmospheric data and I think there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" "About humans." His fingers closed around the box. "You see, your planet is hostile. I won't deny that. The chemical cocktail out there would kill any of your species in seconds, but humans aren't like your species." She could hear the frown in his voice. "Commander, with respect, you are made of the same organic compounds as any carbon-based life form. Your body would react to these toxins in the same way." "Would it?" Pulled the box from her pocket and looked at it. On the lid there was a picture of a skull and crossbones, a warning label, "This product will kill you." She smiled at the irony. "Ambassador, I'd like to request that you unseal the pod's external hatch." Dead silence on the comm. Then several voices at once, all of them alarmed. "Commander, that is not possible. The atmospheric conditions. You would die instantly. This is not permitted." Waited for the noise to settle. When it did, his voice returned, tight with stress. "Commander, I must insist that you not attempt to open that hatch. The hydrogen sulfide concentration alone is over 800 parts per million. Exposure would cause immediate poisoning. You would suffocate before you could take a single step." 800 parts per million, repeated thoughtfully. "That's about the concentration we get near volcanic vents on Earth. There are humans who live near those vents. They complain about the smell, but they survive." "That is not. The ammonia level is about what we use in industrial cleaning products. Unpleasant but manageable. The methane is inert unless ignited. And the heat," she shrugged. "I've worked in deserts hotter than this." His voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, what are you saying?" Stood up and moved to the hatch controls. She placed her hand on the manual release lever. Through the viewport she could see the hellish landscape waiting for her. Yellow fog, red stone, crystals like frozen fire. "I'm saying, Ambassador, that humans evolved on a planet that was trying to kill us since the day we climbed down from the trees. We breathe an atmosphere that's 20% oxygen, a gas so reactive that it rusts metal and feeds fire. We drink a solvent that dissolves more substances than any other liquid in the galaxy. We expose our skin to radiation from our own sun and call it a pleasant day at the beach." She gripped the lever. "Your atmosphere is hostile, Ambassador, but so is ours. The difference is we got used to it." She pulled the lever. The hatch began to open. They cautioned, "You can't survive this atmosphere." She lit a cigarette and grinned in the toxic air. Part 3. The air hit like a fist. Hot, thick, foul. It poured into the pod like water flooding a sinking ship, carrying with it the stench of rotten eggs and chemical fire. Her eyes immediately began to water. Her nose burned. Her throat closed up in instinctive protest, refusing to let this poison into her body. She stepped out anyway. The ground crunched under her boots. The yellow fog swirled around her legs like curious ghosts. Above, the sky was the color of a fresh bruise, dark and angry. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance. Forced herself to breathe. The first breath was agony. Her lungs screamed at her. Every cell in her body demanded that she turn around, get back in the pod, seal the hatch. This was wrong. This was death. No sane creature would stand here and breathe this air. The second breath was slightly easier. The third was almost manageable. Had done her research. Hydrogen sulfide was toxic, yes. At high concentrations it could kill in seconds, but the human nose could detect it at concentrations as low as 0.5 parts per million. By the time you stopped smelling it, around 100 parts per million, it was numbing your olfactory nerves. The deadly threshold was around 1,000 parts per million. Its atmosphere sat at 850, dangerous, damaging, but not instantly fatal, not for a human. She had maybe 5 minutes before serious harm set in, more than enough time. Behind her, the pod's external speakers crackled with voices. She couldn't make out the words, but she could imagine them, screaming, panicking, demanding to know how she was still standing. Walked away from the pod. Every step felt like pushing through water. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with the tears that streamed from her burning eyes. Her skin prickled with the ammonia in the air. Her mouth tasted like copper and sulfur. She had felt worse, not often, but she had. 20 meters from the pod, she stopped. She turned to face the external camera that she knew was broadcasting her image back to the station, back to the consortium, back to every alien who had smiled politely and dismissed humanity as children. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the box of cigarettes. The comm unit on her belt was still working. She heard its voice, ragged with disbelief. "Commander, Commander, you must return to the pod immediately. You are dying. You are dying as we watch." Shook a cigarette from the box and placed it between her lips. "Not yet, Ambassador." "The methane." She could hear the terror in his voice now. "If you create a spark, the entire valley could ignite. Please, Commander, do not." "Methane needs to be at 5% concentration to ignite," said calmly. "You've got about 2% here. I checked the readings before I came down." She pulled a lighter from her other pocket, old-fashioned, metal and flint. "This won't do anything except light my cigarette." She flicked the lighter. The flame held steady in the toxic wind. Small, orange, perfectly ordinary. She touched it to the cigarette. The paper caught. Smoke rose from the tip, mingling with the yellow fog that surrounded her. Inhaled. The nicotine mixed with the chemicals already burning in her lungs. It was possibly the worst cigarette she had ever smoked. It tasted like death and sulfur and regret. She grinned anyway. Through the haze of her watering eyes, she could see the mining drones in the distance. They had stopped working. Their operators, she knew, were watching her instead. Watching the impossible human who stood on a world that should have killed her, smoking a cigarette like she was on a lunch break. "Ambassador," she said, loud enough for the comm to pick up. "Humanity would like to renegotiate our trade agreements." Silence on the line. A long, shocked, terrible silence. Then finally a voice, not someone else, one of the other consortium species. "How is this possible?" Took another drag of her cigarette. The smoke curled around her face. "We're from Earth, my friend. Maybe you should look up what kind of planet that is." She stood there for another minute, letting them watch, letting them understand. The pain was building now. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. Her skin was starting to redden from the chemical burns. Every breath was a little harder than the last. But she didn't fall. She didn't choke. She didn't die. When she finally turned and walked back to the pod, she did it slowly, deliberately. The walk of someone who was leaving because they chose to, not because they had to. She climbed back into the pod and sealed the hatch behind her. Clean air flooded in. She collapsed into the seat, coughing violently, her body finally allowed to react to what she had just done. Blood flecked her lips. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut. Her throat felt like she had swallowed fire. She would spend the next week in a medical bay. The doctors would tell her she was lucky to be alive. They would lecture her about permanent lung damage and chemical scarring. They would shake their heads at human stubbornness. But as the pod began its ascent back to the station, looked down at the hellish world below and smiled through her cracked, bleeding lips. The message had been delivered. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The comm unit crackled one more time, his voice weak and stunned. "Commander, I do not understand. Why did you do this? Why risk your life for a demonstration?" Leaned back in her seat and closed her burning eyes. "Because, Ambassador, your consortium has been treating humanity like children, patting us on the head, giving us the scraps from your table." She coughed again, tasting copper. "I needed you to see what we really are." "And what is that?" Thought about her ancestors, the ones who had crossed ice sheets during the last glacial period, the ones who had sailed oceans in wooden boats, the ones who had climbed mountains for no reason except to prove they could, the ones who had survived plagues and famines and wars and kept going, always kept going. "Survivors, Ambassador," she said. "We are survivors." The pod rose through the yellow clouds, leaving the poisoned valley behind. Below, the mining drones remained still. Their operators had seen something they would never forget. A human walking in the fires of hell. And grinning. They cautioned, "You can't survive this atmosphere." She lit a cigarette and grinned in the toxic air. Part 4. The medical bay on the consortium station was designed for 7 different species. It had beds that could adjust to any body shape, machines that could analyze any biochemistry, and doctors who could treat any ailment. None of them had ever treated a human before. Lay on the bed while alien physicians moved around her like confused ghosts. They scanned her lungs. They analyzed her blood. They looked at the readings and then looked at her, as if expecting her to disappear. "This is not possible," the lead physician said. He was a tall and dark-skinned with a voice like wind through leaves. "Your respiratory system shows severe chemical damage. Your blood oxygen levels are critically low. You should be dead." "I've been told that before," said. Her voice was rough. Each word hurt. "Keep watching." They did, and over the next 3 days they watched something they had never seen before: human healing. The damaged tissue in his lungs began to repair itself. New cells grew to replace the dead ones. The inflammation decreased. Her blood oxygen levels slowly climbed back toward normal. The chemical burns on her skin faded from red to pink to healthy brown. The physicians documented everything. They sent reports to their colleagues. They argued about whether their instruments were malfunctioning. Meanwhile, on the orbital stations, everything had changed. Ambassador had called an emergency meeting of the Consortium Council. The 7 species gathered in the Great Chamber, their holographic representatives flickering in the artificial air. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had seen the human woman walking on the surface of, breathing its poison, lighting a cigarette in the toxic wind. "This changes nothing," the representative said. His exoskeleton clicked as he spoke, colors shifting across his shell. "One human performed a stunt. It was foolish and nearly fatal. We should not overreact." Overreact? His membrane skin was cycling through shades of gray and white, the colors of deep distress. "She walked on a world that would kill any of us in seconds. She breathed our unbreathable air. She burned vegetation in our unbearable atmosphere, and she is recovering. How is that not cause for reaction?" "Human biology is unusual," they admitted, "but unusual is not dangerous." "Is it not?" A new voice joined the discussion. The representative, small and quick, with eyes that calculated everything. "I have been researching the human. Perhaps you should all see what I found." The holographic display in the center of the chamber changed. Images appeared, video recordings, data files. "Earth." The council watched in silence as they showed them what humanity's home planet looked like. Deserts where temperatures exceeded 60 degrees. Frozen wastelands where it dropped below -50. Oceans that covered most of the surface, filled with salt water and predators. Mountains that rose kilometers into the sky, with air too thin to breathe at the top. "This is their normal environment," they said. "Now observe what they do for entertainment." More images. Humans diving into deep water, descending to depths that would crush unprotected bodies. Humans climbing frozen cliffs with nothing but ropes and metal hooks. Humans running through deserts for days without stopping. Humans jumping from aircraft with nothing but fabric to slow their fall. "They call this sport," they said. "They do it for pleasure." The representative leaned forward, his bark skin creaking. "This cannot be accurate. No species would voluntarily expose itself to such conditions." "I assure you the data is correct, but that is not the most concerning part." They paused. "Observe their diet." The display changed again. Humans eating peppers that contained chemicals designed to cause pain. Humans drinking ethanol, a substance toxic to most carbon-based life. Humans consuming caffeine, a natural pesticide that plants evolved to kill insects. All of them smiling, all of them enjoying it. "They poison themselves for fun," they said quietly. "Their bodies have adapted to process toxins that would kill us. They have been doing this for thousands of years." The council chamber was silent. Finally spoke, "What else?" "Their history." This voice was flat, clinical, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been fear. "They survived a mass extinction event, an asteroid strike that killed most life on their planet. They survived ice ages that lasted. They survived plagues that killed half their population. Every time their world tried to destroy them, they adapted and continued. The images changed one more time. Humans in primitive clothing, hunting animals 10 times their size with wooden spears. Humans building ships to cross oceans. Humans constructing rockets to leave their planet. They went from caves to space travel in less than 12,000 years, they said. The fastest technological development of any known species, and they did it while constantly fighting each other. Fighting, they asked. They wage war on themselves, constantly. Their history is an endless series of conflicts. They develop weapons not to fight predators but to fight other humans. They have created weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. Then they will destroy themselves, they said. We need only wait. Perhaps, they agreed. But consider this. Despite constant warfare, despite environmental disasters, despite plagues and famines and every obstacle their world could throw at them, their population has grown. They are 8 billion strong. They have colonized their own solar system, and now they are here in our territory asking for a seat at our table. They turned off the display. The chamber fell dark except for the holographic forms of the representatives. Commander did not walk on to prove a point about trade agreements, they said. She did it to show us what we are dealing with, a Class 12 species, perhaps the most dangerous form of life this galaxy has ever encountered. Dangerous? His voice was barely a whisper. She didn't even bring weapons. They looked at him. All of them looked at him. Ambassador, they said slowly, she didn't need to. She walked onto our most hostile world and survived by being herself. Weapons would have been redundant. The council sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, they spoke. His colors had faded to a pale, worried blue. What do we do? Stood, his membrane skin had settled into a color none of them had seen before. Pale silver, almost white, the color of surrender. We give them what they want, he said, whatever they want, and we pray to our various gods that they remain friendly. In the medical bay, opened her eyes and smiled. Her aide lieutenant stood beside her bed with a data pad. The consortium just called, said. They want to resume negotiations. Smile widened. I'll bet they do. She sat up slowly, ignoring the pain in her chest. Outside the medical bay's viewport, the yellow clouds have swirled in their eternal dance. Somewhere down there, the mining drones had resumed their work, but the operators who controlled them would never look at their screens quite the same way again. They had seen a monster walking in their hell, and the monster had been smiling. They cautioned, you can't survive this atmosphere. She lit a cigarette and grinned in the toxic air. Part 5. The negotiations took 3 days. They could have taken 3 hours. Sat across from Ambassador in the same conference room where the consortium had tried to dismiss humanity with polite smiles and empty presentations. The same holographic displays glowed in the air. The same comfortable chairs surrounded the table. Everything was different now. Looked tired. His membrane skin was dull, cycling through weak shades of gray. His 3 eyes kept drifting to his face as if he was still trying to understand what he had seen. The other consortium representatives sat around the table, equally subdued. The clicked quietly to himself. The stared at nothing with ancient, worried eyes. The took notes with shaking hands. His voice was still rough. The doctors had told her to rest it. She had ignored them like she ignored most advice that got in her way. Full partnership status in the consortium, she said. Equal voting rights on all major decisions. Nodded, agreed. Access to 17 worlds currently classified as uninhabitable. Slid a data pad across the table. These planets specifically. Your species can't use them. Mine can. The ambassador looked at the list. Volcanic worlds, ice planets, toxic atmospheres, places that the consortium had written off as worthless because no one could survive there long enough to extract resources. Agreed, he said again. A seat on the governing council. Permanent. Non-removable except by unanimous vote of all other members, including humanity. Agreed. And a mutual defense treaty. Leaned back in her chair. If any member of the consortium is attacked, all members respond, including Earth. This time hesitated. His skin flickered with uncertain colors. Commander, I must ask, why would humanity offer to defend us, after how we treated you? Studied him for a moment. Behind her eyes she was seeing something else. Memories of Earth. Memories of her childhood in a small town in Argentina, where the nights were cold and the days were hot and the world was simple. Memories of her first day in the military, standing in formation with 100 other young people, all of them scared, all of them determined. Memories of the hull breach that had nearly killed her. The moment when the stars had appeared through the torn metal and she had understood, truly understood, how fragile life was. Because you're not enemies, she said finally. You're neighbors, and humanity has learned the hard way that it's better to have friends than to stand alone. Was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out with his long, thin hand and pressed his palm against the data pad. The consortium accepts your terms, he said, all of them. Nodded, she stood up slowly, her body still aching from her walk on. The doctors had warned her there might be permanent damage. Her lung capacity would never be quite what it was. She would tire more easily. She would feel the effects for the rest of her life. She didn't mind. Every scar was a story. Every wound was a lesson. And this wound had bought humanity a place among the stars. There's one more thing, said quietly. Paused. I need to understand. The ambassador's voice was barely above a whisper. You could have simply asked for these terms. We might have negotiated. We might have agreed to some of them. Why did you risk your life for a demonstration? Turned to face him. Around the table, the other representatives leaned in, waiting for her answer. Even the stopped taking notes. Because you wouldn't have taken us seriously, said. You would have smiled and nodded and given us scraps, just like you've always done with new species, just like you were planning to do before I stepped out of that pod. Opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. They both knew she was right. Every species in this consortium evolved on worlds that were kind to them, continued. Gentle climates, stable environments. You became intelligent because the universe gave you space to think and grow and develop. Your evolution was a gift. She walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Billions of them, billions of worlds, billions of possibilities. Humanity didn't get that gift, she said. Our world was a battlefield from the moment we appeared on it. Ice ages that lasted, predators that hunted us in packs, diseases that wiped out entire populations, earthquakes, volcanoes, floods. Every generation our planet tried to kill us, and every generation we refused to die. She turned back to face the council. The atmosphere on, that wasn't a test of courage, ambassador. That was Tuesday. That was an ordinary day for a species that has been fighting for survival since the beginning of its existence. The room was silent. Outside the viewport, the yellow clouds have continued their eternal dance. Somewhere below, the mining drones crawled over rocks and dug precious minerals from the earth, machines doing work that no living being could do. Except now one living being had done it, and everything had changed. You asked why I risked my life, said. The answer is simple. I risked my life because that's what humans do. We throw ourselves at impossible odds. We climb mountains because they're there. We dive into oceans because we want to see what's at the bottom. We walk on poison worlds and light cigarettes in toxic air because someone told us we couldn't. She smiled. It hurt her cracked lips, but she smiled anyway. That's who we are, ambassador. That's what you're getting when you partner with humanity. A species that doesn't know how to give up. A species that looks at death and thinks, not today. A species that has been to hell and back so many times that we've started to bring souvenirs. She extended her hand. After a long moment, took it. "Welcome to the consortium, Commander," he said. His voice was steady now. His skin had settled into a color she hadn't seen before, soft gold like a sunrise. Respect, perhaps, or hope. "Thank you, Ambassador," replied. "Now let's get to work." The treaty was signed that afternoon. Humanity officially became the 8th member of the mining consortium. The news spread across the galaxy within hours. A new species had joined the galactic community, not as newcomers to be, not as children to be patronized, but as equals, as partners, as survivors. Returned to Earth 2 weeks later, she received a hero's welcome, though she didn't feel like a hero. She had simply done what needed to be done. She had shown the galaxy what humanity was made of. On her last night before the long journey home, she stood on the observation deck of the consortium station and looked down at one final time. Yellow clouds, red mountains, a world of poison and fire. Lieutenant joined her at the viewport. "The consortium is already receiving applications from human workers," he said. "Miners, engineers, scientists, all of them willing to work on the surface." Nodded. "Of course they are. Tell them to bring sunscreen." Laughed, then he sobered. "Commander, there's one thing I don't understand. When you lit that cigarette down there, you had to know the risks, the chemical exposure, the potential for ignition, the damage to your lungs. Were you afraid?" Was quiet for a moment. She thought about the moment when she had opened the pod's hatch, the moment when the poison air had rushed in and her body had screamed at her to run, the moment when she had taken that first step onto the alien ground. "Yes," she said finally. "I was terrified. Every second I was down there, I was fighting the urge to turn around and flee." "But you didn't." "No," she looked at. "That's the secret, Lieutenant. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. It's taking that step even when every nerve in your body is begging you to stop." She turned back to the viewport. "That's what makes us human. Not that we're stronger than other species or smarter or more advanced. We're not. But when the universe tells us we can't survive, we don't listen. We just keep going. One step at a time. One breath at a time. Until the universe gives up and admits that we were right all along." Below them glowed like a corrupted jewel. Deadly, beautiful, and now partially human. Smiled. Somewhere on Earth, millions of years ago, her ancestors had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. They had dreamed of worlds beyond their own. They had hoped that someday, somehow, their descendants would find out. Now those descendants were here, standing among the stars, taking their place in a galaxy that had thought them weak and found them otherwise. The universe had tried to kill them. The universe had failed. And humanity, as always, kept going.